So, welcome everybody to the eighth in the series of Artists Beyond the Studio. Stephen Lawlor is an Irish printmaker, painter, and sculptor. He has been a member of Graphic Studio Dublin since 1983, where he was chairman of the board of directors from 2000 to 2005. Stephen has exhibited and delivered talks, workshops, and masterclasses all over the world, including China, Sweden, the UK, and the USA. He is represented by, and this is a long list, Oliver Sears Gallery and So Fine Art Editions in Dublin, Galerie Kunstwerket Oslo, Approved Artist Antwerp, Galerie Hella Knudsen Stockholm, Galerie Astley in Vastmanland in Sweden, and the Bankside Gallery in London. Stephen's work draws from nature and art history, referencing the old masters, the impressionists, pop art, and popular culture. His most recent set of prints are a sumptuously rich set of portraits, ranging in subject matter from Judith to Elizabeth I. Each print is made up of 3 or 4 colour plates, layered with Stephen's characteristically deeply etched lines and marks and washes of spitbite, a technique where the acid is painted directly onto the plate. I hope Stephen will have a bit of time to talk about these prints and his influences and his inspiration in making them. I think I can safely say that in the years I've known him, Stephen has been one of the most hardworking printmakers I know. Shoulder to the wheel, literally, all the time. I am slightly in awe of his dedication to his craft and his determination. The past few years have seen Stephen's practice gain national and international standing. In 2016, he was elected to the Royal Society of Painter Printmakers in London, and in 2018, he became a member of Ace-Donna. Stephen has always been keen to mentor and encourage younger artists in the studio, curating exhibitions, delivering masterclasses, and supporting the new talent coming up after him. I'm interested in hearing of Stephen's travels and the trajectory of his career, how he found himself delivering lectures in China about Irish printmaking, and what he learned while spending time there. I would love to hear about his various residencies and how they came about in Sweden, France, the USA, China, and I'm presuming there's probably more. These connections made and friendships developed over the years with artists, galleries, and curators have been a key part of Stephen's career, and travel seems to have become an increasingly important part of his practice in the past few years. I would love to hear about some of these trips, what Stephen has been doing in the past year in his home studio, and also what future plans he has for travel once that becomes a possibility again. Over to you, Stephen.
I think you could give this talk, Niamh. I don't need to say anything. You've said everything. Anyway, thank you. Hello, everybody. Yes, well, Niamh has introduced me very well there. I hope I can live up to what she's just outlined. So I joined Graphic Studio in 1983 as a young man, and I didn't really have any intention of becoming a printmaker. I thought I wanted to be an actor, really. But anyway, you end up where you are, and I took to it and enjoyed it, and it became my life, I suppose. So I've put together too many things, and I've as you can see, the X's on those parts that I've actually taken out. We wouldn't get through them all. They all I wanted to touch on them though, because they all feed into everything else. Everything you do, I believe, has something, is connected to everything else you do. And all of the things I was involved with in the promotion of printmaking, you know, my time, my involvement in Graphic Studio, the projects we put together in the early days. I set up a company called Artemis to distribute prints. We weren't selling enough prints, and it was very difficult to live in the late 80s and during the 90s. So that was a really important learning curve in logistics and dealing with galleries. You know, I had an early database there were so many artists involved, but it was very successful in its time, that little company. And I learned a hell of a lot by doing it. So I'm just going to focus on the prints of my own, a few examples from the different periods, and then talk about my travels, as Niamh outlined. Okay, so I just broke them into these sections. I made horse images from the early mid-80s to the mid-90s and became quite well known for them, which I tried to shake off. But small landscape etchings from the late 80s to early 2000s became my sort of bread and butter. They were you know, 4 plate, 4 or 5, up to 10 colors sometimes, in fact. But they were, you could really move around them quite easily. You could change direction quite easily, and that gave me it was a huge learning curve in terms of working with copper and working with color, etc. I then increased the scale in the late 90s, and then was invited to go to Sweden in the early 2000s, which kind of changed everything for me. But I'll go through the work and outline it for you. Okay, so these are very early horses, quite crude creatures. You couldn't even call them horses, and quite crude prints too. But they're very ancient creatures, really. And I suppose it's the poise and majesty of them I was trying to address and look at. I never knew anything about horses and don't know why I was attracted to them. But it's quite a difficult form to deal with. It's like a box with something sticking out at one end and 4 legs. But I just had an affinity for them, and these prints were really successful, and it took me a long time to shake them off. I then was asked by a foundry. A guy said to me one day, "You're that guy that makes horses. Would you not consider 3 dimensions?" And I thought, well, 2 dimensions is difficult enough. Why would I do that? I considered it, and in fact, Robert Russell helped me with armatures. If you remember, Robert, it was difficult at the time, but great to engage with something in a 360 degrees, and it really gives you a tactile a feel approach to a form. And I still make them occasionally. I wouldn't consider myself a sculptor at all. So the small etchings, these were my first sort of outing to look back through the history of Western painting. And, I would look at works by Northern European and Italian painters from about the 14th century to the 18th century. And at the very start, these early ones, these sort of flattened, this is Joaquin Patinier. I would steal objects from these paintings and then put them together in a small vignette, little etchings that were quite crude at the beginning. Those clouds look very, very clunky. But, slowly you begin to master what you're doing. These are about 11 centimeters high by 9 centimeters wide, in editions of 100, and there are more than 50 in that series. So they kept me alive, because I was distributing them and other people's work, not just my own, to so many galleries. It really did add up to, a living, a way to survive as a printmaker, and a way to carry on with making art. They became a bit more abstract as time went on, but in terms of learning, how to make prints, complex prints, they were a great way to do it, and a fast way to do it. I then moved into, larger prints, etchings. Again, I kind of stopped making lithographs, and I stopped making monoprints and focused on etching. So this is Claude Lorraine. I traveled back and forth to the National Gallery in London to see this painting about 10 times. And I know it's a very formal painting. And when you look at it, you just see a classical painting. But so many landscape artists after his time were just fascinated with it. Constable was besotted with them and this painting, and painted many versions of it. It looks like it's lit from within. And that's kind of really where I was trying to squeeze the marrow out of these paintings and maybe I was just a frustrated painter who was in fact a printmaker, but that's where I was. And, this larger scale was in fact not as difficult as I thought. It was in fact easier. You had more room to maneuver, although it's physically harder to produce them, as I'm sure many of you know. So over from the mid 90s, or late 90s, sorry, up to about 2012, I was making these landscapes, and they're very atmospheric, sometimes almost completely abstract, but a place I wanted to be with them. I was invited to go to, I had shown some prints at Gallery Astley in Sweden, and this is the place that sort of led me on to the more international thing, doing those things. I never planned it. I never thought I want to go around the world. I want to be an international presence. You just develop relationships and you keep moving. So I went to the Swedish forest. I said, I'd like an exhibition. And the director there said to me, no, I'll tell you what, if you go into the forest and paint some paintings of our forest, we'll give you an exhibition. I thought, Jesus, you know, so cliche to actually go out into the forest and paint. I thought it just wasn't me. But in fact, I was amazed because it was a fantastic experience. These are all, I had started painting by this time. These are all acrylic on paper. And a lot of the paper acrylic works were just giant pieces of paper put down on the ground with rocks on the corners. And I had a brush on a stick and I just painted them really fast because I was being eaten alive by mosquitoes out there. So, you know, I know that they're quite crude as paintings, but in fact, sometimes that's a good place to be, a place where you're not very much in control of what you're doing. You're just forcing it, and interesting things happen. So I made etchings, I made silk screens and drawings and even sculptures of some of the things in that. And a year later, I'm back to have an exhibition there. So it took me away from art history and into the real world in a way. But then something happened one night there that it really shook me to the core. A woman appeared at the end of my bed. Doesn't happen very often, but this one wasn't made of flesh and blood. She was made out of smoke, and she appeared quite slowly in pieces, in small pieces, and then she lunged at me, and I nearly died. But it really shook me so deeply that emotionally and psychologically that I started making images of women basically from history in the same way I'd been looking at old master paintings. So I started off making paintings, and then from those paintings, sculptures and prints. So this is an early painting. It's painted by, a print of mine based on a painting by Francois Boucher and Madame de Pompidou. And you know, you start looking into the history of these women and who they were, and it's fascinating, all of it. I don't know why, if it hadn't been for that event, I would never have been there. So I'm having a book brought out shortly by Gandon Editions, a part of their profile series. And there's 4 texts in that book. And at the end of it is a piece by Theo Dorgan, who talks about these images of women. And I'll just quote from him. He'll probably do it better justice than I will. As if each subject is present as somehow the ghost of themselves, there are notable exceptions of these faceless portraits. Elizabeth I, for instance, is clearly a portrait, yet it resists either the hagiographic read of an English patriot or the disdainful hostile response of a colonial subject. The 2 geishas in memory and the young woman in Was I Awake or Sleeping resist our emotional response, despite having clear facial features, because by some sleight of hand they present as both themselves and as mask wearers, so that attention expands to consider their faces as elements in a larger composition. These Japanese women, the geisha, I took an exhibition to Tokyo, I think it was about 2017 or something, and I met a professor there, an Irish professor, who translated a book called The Tales of Issei, which is a 12th century collection of haiku poems and short stories about romantic tales. So I think about the same period in Europe, those same kinds of things were happening. So I included the Japanese women, why not, in my historical images of dead people. And, you know, yeah, I'm very happy I did. I still make them. So just to try to explain or describe how I would look at a subject or take one, the painting, as somebody who has no academic training as a painter, I went at it really with blunt brute force, and you know, dragging paint across the surface, pulling paint in all directions until eventually something emerges. And so this was a painting I'd made, I don't know, 2015 or something, or 14, and from that painting I started making pieces of sculpture. So I started cutting into the wax with a knife, I suppose, to extend those dragged paint marks that I'd been dragging. I dragged them across with a sort of a squeegee type thing, and then of course it turned into an etching as well. And so the connections between the media is just wonderful, to be able to step from one to the other. and perhaps see how you can not remake, but address it in a different medium. And had I not been painting or making sculpture, I may never have arrived here. So, you know, yeah, I don't think, I know it looks simple, but it's sort of emotionally driven, and it radiates emotion. I like this print. So here's one of the paintings it's based on. The person who bought the original painting he's the CEO of Google in Europe. I was very delighted that he bought it, but he asked me who's this picture based on, or through the gallery. I thought, Jesus, what am I going to do? It was kind of, I started with this, but to make a portrait of somebody, you don't think, well, what's the point of just looking at a portrait and copying it, as it were, or recreating it? So I in fact used two portraits. It is an image based on two people. But even that doesn't sort of sum up where you want to go in the end, to validate it somehow, or give it presence, give it its own character. I had prior to that based a painting on this painting by who is it? It's Nicolas Poussin, and it is called Rinaldo and Armida, which is based on a poem by Tasso, Italian poet from the 16th century. And, you know, that poem became an opera, and the opera by Handel, this person singing the song of the opera. I just love the way through time all these people are connected, that a poem created an opera, and it was very popular in the 1600s, apparently, that same story. But it really gives sort of gravitas to, I just feel modern art and historical art, they're all the one thing, really. And there's no problem going back to cannibalize or to appropriate anything from it. So there's an effort from me to explain or describe the sort of delicate way I sort of pick my way through reasoning these portraits and what they are. I made that in China. This is kind of, I started this before the other portrait of this guy. So a more modern icon, a figure taken from TV of a dying American dream, you know? Okay, so these are, I think, later paintings. Well, this is quite early, but if I go through them quite quickly, this is the Real World, a show I had in Dublin called Three Rivers, the water surface. This is from a show of copper mines. These are ancient copper mines that were no longer used in Wales and in Wicklow. And so I really enjoyed it. Again, out in the landscape. I didn't make them in the landscape. I took lots of photographs, I think, and made them in the studio. But it pulls you so far away from printmaking that it's great to come back and bring with you that sense of freedom. Painting has too much freedom compared to what we have to endure, the tightness, the rigors of printmaking. I did some paintings of people. These are real people. You couldn't call them portraits, but that's that was a period I was painting that landscape from life at the same time. But I did eventually go back to the place I like to be, and that is sort of, the history of Western painting, I suppose you'd call it, in painting and also through print, and sometimes sculpture, occasionally. Okay, so this just the more recent paintings now. I'll just say, the forms merge and blur into each other. So it doesn't matter whether the landscape background or the figures and forms in the foreground have any real relevance, or meaning is not of that much interest to me. Emotion is of the highest interest to me. So once again, picking objects and placing objects in paintings. Sometimes you have objects from different paintings in one of these paintings, submerged or re-emerging. And I'm kind of happy where I've arrived with them. Okay, so about talk now about if I start with Sweden, and that's really the place where the kindness of Lars and Lena and of the family, Nulian family, who run Gallery Astley, I just got to know them as really good friends, and so it's a kind of a second home. I go there twice a year. I know some of you have been there and will be familiar with it, but in the early days, I wasn't that interested. I said, no, I'm not interested. But eventually I went over for one exhibition. And as checks started to arrive, you sort of you perk up a little bit and think, my God, this could be interesting. And I got to know more and more people through them. China was somewhere through Anders. He introduced me to, asked me would I like to go, and I went to Guanlan, the print center in Shenzhen. And from there, met lots of other people. Through the projects I have put together, I meet other people. So Japan, Tokyo Gaidai was part of the Yates exhibition. Belgium was through somebody I met in China. England, Lars persisted in persuading me to apply for the RE, the Royal Society of Painter Printmakers, which is a really great institution. And I met so many other people in other institutions through them, and got work into collections. Wales was through somebody I met in France. United States, again, somebody I met in China. Australia, somebody I met in China, and invite you to go. And I said, why would I want to go there? It's a good response, actually. I never thought of putting it like that. It's a terrible place. Why would I want to go there? And I said, but you must come. Okay. And then when you go, you realize, wow, what a place. I have to say that the international printmaking community is enormous. And the openness and friendliness of all the people I've met is astonishing. They give you everything. Generous and friendly. And they have the same concerns we have as printmakers. Anyway, this is the person who put me on that path, for better or worse, and his partner, who I have to say is equally as good. And they work together. They run a studio together there. This is the tiny bedroom in Lars's studio. Some of you may have stayed there. He doesn't waste any space, as you can see. On top of the plant chest, you go to sleep. But it's really cozy and really well ventilated. There's only about 3 or 4 people work there at a time. And it's a great place to work. I go and I work with Anders in a separate studio to make prints sometimes, or he gives me a studio to paint in, which is great. So this is, if you look left outside his front door, you're looking into the art center, and you're looking down. There's a sculpture park, as you can see. It's such a beautiful place, and it's surrounded by forest, miles and miles of forest. A fantastic place. Winter can be really cold. It gets down to below -20, and but it's dry cold. You can you can put up with it. Just walking can be dangerous around there. So that's Anders on the left, Anders Nulian, and that is the Irish ambassador on the right. I don't know how many solo shows I've had in Sweden, maybe 10 or 15. That's a show at Gallery Helle Knudsen in Stockholm, another Irish ambassador. And I should say that the Irish ambassadors around the world, but I must have had shows open by 5 or 6 of them alone in Sweden. They are fantastic. Foreign Affairs is a brilliant department and always does their best to help you promote artworks abroad. This is the church in a town called Kiruna in Norrland, the very northernmost province of Sweden. And it is above the Arctic Circle. There's a copper mine there, an iron mine that is under the town. And the deeper they dig, the more it goes under the town. They're going to move the entire town. And above the Arctic Circle, there's 3 nights of darkness, in complete darkness in winter, and 3 nights of complete sunlight in summer. But a really great experience. And I've been pretty much all over Sweden now. This is Konstforum in Norrköping, central Sweden, with Mick Cullen. I had a 2 or 3 person show with him, another Irish ambassador. But the galleries, the hosts, this is, as some of you will remember who came to Stockholm in 2020, last year, this time last year, just before the first lockdown. That's another Irish ambassador. And it's a small gallery, but Helle, I've had a relationship with Helle for many years. She's actually Danish, but lives in Stockholm. And a lot of print artists show with her. And there's a small crew from Graphic Studio who came over for that opening. And some of you guys I know have retained the relationship with her, but again, it's up to yourselves to push it further and expand and into the market in Sweden. China, I'll move quickly on to, is an enormous country, and it's growing so fast. So these are some of the places I went. The print studio at Guanlan in Shenzhen, which is just north of Hong Kong, is massive. It's got 100 staff alone, and they're so welcoming. They look after you in so many ways. I mean, culturally, it's so different, but China has had 5,000 years of culture, continuous culture, and it's astonishing. It really makes me feel like a savage by comparison coming from here. But it really is an astonishing country. Okay, so I'll try and go quickly through these. This is the print base in Guanlan, and this is a Hakka village. The Hakka were, indigenous people who lived in that area before the Han people arrived, and they left the villages fine. I mean, they still exist elsewhere. They just don't exist in Shenzhen anymore. So they've transformed the village into a print base, they call it, and it's great to live in these buildings. The people are wonderful. You're given 2 or 3 assistants to work with you, and you produce editions over the time you're there. I've been a few times to Guanlan. And they bring you out into the community for festivals and kind of wheel you out as a European expert. But you just go along with it, meet all the nice food and meet all the nice people. And it's just great. I mean, the children, something like 10,000 children in this school. I was astonished. And they're all so happy. They're all so friendly. And just, as a cultural experience, it is just fantastic to be there. These were, they looked like 9-year-olds or 10-year-olds, but these were carving lino blocks. Look at how complex that thing is in the foreground. I thought, oh my God, we haven't a hope. And the numbers, of course, all of them do it. It's great. Tiny little etching presses, tiny little woodblock presses. Brilliant. Okay, so IAPA, I got involved with IAPA through the Yates show I put on. Somebody asked me would I like to go, and this is an international printmaking association set up in Beijing by Professor Wang at the Academy of Fine Art in Beijing, probably the most prestigious art college in China. They had an exhibition during that first seminar at the Forbidden City. That's the first exhibition of Western art ever in the Forbidden City, and so I was delighted to be there. It's an enormous space with so many prints from so many countries. They take print very seriously in China. So it's not considered to be some sort of crafty thing that should be supported. They consider it to be a part of the contemporary art world. And so digital art and printing, all of those things are connected right through the centuries. For them, they see themselves as instigators of the country where printmaking began. I suppose they contend with India for that title, but they really do take it seriously, and it's just great to feel so important in as an artist. You're so welcomed. Most of the people I worked with there were professors from universities around the world, and I was invited to go to Buenos Aires and the United States and Belgium as part of that. They did invite some artists like me and some curators and people who ran studios as well. But it's a kind of why or how you're invited is and why things happen in China sometimes is very confusing. But I wasn't going to say no. The second seminar there took place in Jingdezhen City in Jiangxi province, kind of central China. This is 2018, I think. And it is the center for porcelain or ceramics in China and probably in the world. So from the 5th century, they were making ceramics there. This is the seminar, and it can be quite boring at times because on and on and on, people talking, and then it has to be translated into Chinese, etc. I didn't give a talk at this one, I wasn't well, but in 2020 we did it by Zoom, and I gave quite a long talk on printmaking in the UK for that one. This is the exhibition connected with that one in Jingdezhen. And the ceramics, these are my 2 favorite prints from that show. There's just so much to show, I have to just keep moving. But they're contemporary Chinese prints, but sort of based on traditional Chinese prints, beautifully made. Anyway, this is a kiln where they would have a little train going along that track and wheel it into the kiln and put a number of them in there to fire them. So the sheer volume, there must have been 50 or 100 factories. I don't know the numbers. The numbers and scale, you get lost after a while. But they would have been making pottery. The royal kilns were there in the 12th century, making pottery that was 10 feet high. But these are just everyday pottery ware, and they would have churned them out in the millions. The vastness of China is just hard to grasp. Every shop in Jingdezhen seems to be a ceramic shop. And when I say shop, I don't mean like 10 or 50 or 100, thousands of ceramic shops, one after the other. Some of them sell, badly made, tatty things. Others sell fantastic things. So if anybody's interested in ceramics, Jingdezhen is the place. After Jingdezhen, I went to YAC, a print workshop in Tianjin, which is the port of Beijing. Not as old as Guanlan or as big, smaller and younger, but they're getting there. Really great people to work with. So I was given, well, 2 assistants at first, and then 3 or 4 assistants at certain times. And I made about 5 or 6 prints in the space of 4 weeks I worked there. There's not much to see around the area in Tianjin. It was such a great experience. Again, working with them, they're also friendly, also helpful, and they really want to they learn from you too. So it's a two-way thing. You know, I show them quite a lot. And again, you meet international people when you go there. So there's Australians, Korean, Russians, all. The food was terrible, I have to say. I lost a lot of weight, but that was nothing you can do about that. They did bring us out occasionally for a decent meal. So yeah, and also they bring us to the academy. This is the academy in Tianjin. There's something like 16 million people in Tianjin. And so we gave a talk, each of us gave a talk. I gave a talk on Irish printmaking. And so yeah, it's just great to, just one thing leads to another. I brought, in that same year, I went for the first IAPA conference. I went twice to Beijing. I brought that Yeats exhibition to Beijing. And that was again, a wonderful experience. We had it in the Irish Embassy because our original venue fell through in 798 district. 798 district is a really, a massive area with just galleries in the center of Beijing. We had a great turnout, good sales, and you know, we had Irish music and dancing, and it was a great night. Peter Fallon introduced all the writers to that project and came with us. And there he is in front of the PLA, the People's Liberation Army. You're not allowed to take photographs of the soldiers, but he stood in front of them and I was pretending to take a photograph of him. They all look about 12, but they're real soldiers. Kunming City. Now, somebody asked me in YAC about, you're a wonderful printmaker, Stephen. I said, oh, thank you very much. Why don't you tell your professors how wonderful I am? And they said, what? Oh yes, of course. You're from Kunming City. I said, tell them I'll come and give them a workshop in Kunming City whenever they like. So she did. And they invited me to Kunming City and off I went. It's just north of Vietnam, southwest China. And so this led on to another thing. So you kind of become quite adept at, let's say, moving from one place to the next. So you can see somebody's work familiar up there. I gave a talk on Irish printmaking, as I said. That was my interpreter there, closest to the screen, Stephanie. She was great. And these were third years in printmaking and fine art. The atmosphere was just wonderful. It always is in these Chinese schools. They all seem so young, but they get on with it. Sometimes that was the acid room, and they were splashing ferric chloride everywhere. I thought somebody was going to die, but they didn't, thank God. Nobody got hurt. And if you look at the prints in the foreground there, they're 4-plate prints. All of those had only made one black and white etchings up to that point. And so I believe they learned a hell of a lot. They filmed me in all the talks I gave. So all our secrets, I'm afraid, lads, are out there in China. This was a residency in France in 2018 in a medieval village in the Loch Valley, north of Toulouse, which I went on courtesy of the RE. A great location. It wasn't a great workshop. The guy running it had fallen on bad times. But again, I met more people here who invited me further afield to, it was quite crude, the whole thing, but really enjoyable. Food was wonderful. The setting was fantastic. And again, I met some really worthwhile people. The UK and England, as Niamh said, I was elected to the RE after much encouragement from Lars. And I thought, it's really hard to realize that England is a huge art market on our doorstep, and English people are more familiar. They seem to be with printmaking, with art in general. So the Royal Academy I got involved with through the RE, and the collections they put my work in the Ashmolean Museum, the British Museum, and in the Royal Collection. So you kind of begin to, if you start maneuvering or moving your way around, I think printmakers everywhere in the world have the same interests we do, have the same attitudes we do. How did you do that? What's that all? And so it doesn't really matter whether you're a conceptual artist or whether you're a traditional artist. That is not, you know, as a community, I think printmaking is far more social, and the social interaction, because we work in communal studios, is the key thing, the key element. I don't think painters have this, or even sculptors. So we are lucky in that respect. The print room at the it was called the Sackler room. I can't imagine it's still called the Sackler room, but maybe it is. Yeah, I was really impressed by that rash of dots at the bottom of that wonderful print, and so I pursued it the following year, and it was really well worth it, I have to say. This is the print studio at Aberystwyth Printmakers. They're in that building. Sorry, that's not the entire studio. They only have one room in there. But I did a workshop there in 2017, I think. You know, the usual 6 or 7 people, 4-plate prints. They'd never made color prints before. They all enjoyed it wonderfully. This is the art college. I gave a talk there on Irish printmaking again and my own work. This used to be a laboratory building, such a beautiful building. That's the life drawing room. I thought it was just fantastic. And so as you go outwards, you just meet more and more people. I lead a charmed life, really. Australia, again, a woman asked me, would I go to Adelaide and give a talk? I said, nah, I don't think so. There's no culture in Australia, let's face it. So she said, no, there is, I swear. So I went eventually. I did go to Adelaide and I gave a workshop there. It was great. Adelaide's about the same size as Dublin. Really nice climate. I was blown away by the wildlife and the countryside, and Melbourne then 6.6 million people, you know, such a modern city and really cultured. You know, you can see some of the colonial architecture right next to these massive things they're building now. But I visited the art colleges. This is the Australian Printmaking Workshop. This is a smaller print studio fire station workshop across town, and they even have a shop selling etching equipment in Melbourne. So I was really taken with that city. This is the art department in the Victoria College of Art in which is part of the University of Melbourne. 1.5 million they spent on the print department alone. So you kind of think, oh my God, this is just one room. I could show you 5 photographs, but there it is. Japan, Gaidai, we had an exhibition. Yates again went to Gaidai University. It's a music and visual arts university, quite rare, but again, a wonderful event. You'll recognize the person on the right, who you know, without whom at that time I couldn't have done it. But you know, a lot of hard work getting the show up and dealing with all the people, all the problems, but fantastic. Again, Japan is probably my favorite place in the entire world. This is the director of the college I was going around explaining all the works to, but a really good turnout. And again, I think Irish printmaking is pretty good for the size of our country. And we hold our head up, I do believe, and I talk well of it whenever I can. I eventually got a green tie because I had to, you know. Anyway, a fantastic event and a huge turnout, food, the whole thing. We didn't get to see much of Tokyo, but we did go on to Kyoto after that. Again, whenever you go to these things, to take in and absorb the local culture is just fascinating. Of course, Japan, where better to do it? I'm putting a project together right now to go back there in a couple of years' time. I hope to spend longer. Antwerp, Belgium, I met a professor there who invited me over to the Royal Academy of Arts there to take part in the Masters of Printmaking, to be on the panel, the judging panel. And that is, they've every year they add a few more colleges to they've taken the Royal off it, I think. And so there may be 15 or 20 Masters of Printmaking graduates, each artist giving 3 works. So, I mean, it's a pretty big affair. And they keep inviting me back, so I don't say no. There was, yes, an artist who almost won it when it was held last time, Aoife Scott, which was really kind of gut wrenching. She had a very good position there in the center of the exhibition, and yeah, I'll be back again. They promised me when it starts again, possibly at the end of this year or early next year. Thank you very much. I hope that I hope I didn't speed too quickly through it. There was so much to impart there. Thank you.
And that was fascinating.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks a million. And so much. I feel like you actually could have. We could have done a 3-hour 3
Well,
hours.
yeah, the sections I cut out and my involvement with business is quite extensive, in organizing, in logistics, in terms of, making things happen with print. Yeah.
Yeah.
But thanks.
I have one question for you.
Okay.
It's kind of a nosy question. It's like you're so prolific, and you can see that obviously in all the stuff that you've shown us today. And I'm just wondering, do you know how many prints you make in a year?
Jesus. Well, there's a young printmaker who I live with, actually, who I try to keep pointing that out to all the time. But in my heyday, when I was younger, probably those small ones I outlined to you, and they were such a great way to sort of extend what you're doing. I must have made in a year sometimes, I guess if I average it around 12 or 15 prints a year. I mean, sometimes you don't have to. If you make a print that's doing well, in terms of the public interest, you can survive by 2 or 3 prints in a year if those prints are of interest to collectors. But since I'm painting and since I'm making sculpture, they take time as well. So in fact, your body physically, it's difficult to keep making prints all the time, as you know. But I think, again, if you see it as a routine, I don't even proof them until all the prints are bitten, all the plates are bitten rather. So I'd make 4 prints immediately, 4 plates together, and then I proof them together with what I hope will be the final colors. They never are.
Way to work.
That's how I do it.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah. Brilliant. Anyone any questions?
Hi, Stephen. I just wanted to ask you, that was fantastic. Thank you. Brilliant.
Thanks, Kate.
I know you were mentioning there about Japan. Having experience traveling and working in China also, how would you compare the contemporary printmaking world in the 2 countries?
The Japanese are formidable. They really are. And they're technically fantastic. I mean, when you even see student work in Japan, you nearly fall over. You think, this person hasn't even graduated. But I have spoken to so many people in both Japan and China. There is something that we do have in the West, this individuality, this sort of, how each artist is a fully rounded person. It's through our education is quite broad. In China and Japan, both, the focus is very narrow. They have to succeed in what they're doing, and they seem to force themselves into just doing one thing, being excellent at one thing. The difference between China and Japan, of course, is massive. Japan is so well organized. China is so all over the place, but it's 50 times bigger. I think Western art, has dominated for so long that there are contemporary Chinese artists and contemporary Japanese artists that are really beginning to change things. Now, it was quite slow, but now they are. I can't remember the percentages because I was involved in auction houses and how they work as well in my time in business. And so the auction market is part of the Asian auction market, which started off at 3 or 4% of the global market, is creeping up into 20%. I know this is a financial reflection, but that, if you look back into it means that Chinese and Japanese art is not only desirable in those places, it is globally accepted to be, important enough to be wanted in the international market. So there's great things happening in both countries, and you have to watch it because they really work so hard. They are astonishing, and I think China, there's a big battle between what is traditional and what is modern, still being fought, but it's changing. The conceptual art, it doesn't dominate as completely as it does in the West.
Did you find this year hard, Stephen, not being able to travel?
Yes.
I mean, like everyone found it hard, but I guess it has become such a part of your practice. You're going away 2 or 3 times a year.
No. In 2019, I was away about 7 times. Now, our house had burnt down, so that was a reason not to be here. It was being rebuilt, but I really do miss it. I have to say, because the difference between working in a graphic studio and working in my own studio at home. When you get comfortable in your own studio, it's more difficult to go into graphic studio because, you know, I'd spent, prior to building my own studio, like 25 years always in graphic studio, practically 7 days a week. So slowly you begin to get used to your own company. And so in that respect, no, COVID didn't really hit me. But you would replenish, let's say, your social and your picking up ideas and just meeting new people and going new places. That rejuvenates you. So when you're away for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or even 6 weeks, as I was in, I think, 2018, and on one trip, you come back totally rejuvenated, and you're ready to get stuck into more work in your own studio. You can be isolated then, just working away for 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
Stephen, forgive me, my camera's not working for some reason. What's your assessment of graphic studio, having come back from all of these places over so many years?
As I said, I think we hold our head up in terms of what we produce in Irish printmaking. But graphic studio, I'm a great champion of graphic studio. I have put together a little, you know, PowerPoint presentation on its origins and how it developed and so on. And I'm a staunch believer that the studio is of an international standard. I mean, as a non-profit organization, you know, when you see commercial studios, that's totally different. They're working with high-level artists to basically, you know, to make money. But graphic studio, I think, works on all levels for visiting artists and for members and for, you know, there's room for all. And in fact, that's rare. I don't think I've come across it outside Ireland. I have. Australian Print Workshop was one, but they had squeezed out the members, and the visiting artist program had taken over. And that's because the director there has been there for 24 years. And that was a sort of sad tale. But I'd come across smaller communal studios, but they weren't as organized as graphic studio, I have to say. So for what graphic studio is, I think it's excellent. Does a great job.
But are there technical developments, particularly that investment should be made by, you know, Arts Council grant or that kind of thing?
Possibly digital art. I mean, I don't know whether any of you saw the 70 million sale of that digital piece of art. So you kind of think that is the only art. I'm probably too old to be asking this question too, but it's probable and possible that is exactly the because we've had these discussions at the seminars I've attended, and this battle takes place all over the world. Traditional prints made by hand, how do they compare with works generated by computer? What are we doing? Some people are rabid in their traditional orientation. Some people are you know, more open to and inclusive. So if I were to answer your question, I would say perhaps that is the area where money could and should be spent to attract younger artists in and extend and expand the sort of you know, really modern, up-to-date technology that might bring us further into the next century or whatever.
Stephen, fabulous talk. I almost feel like I need a visa to be here listening to you.
I'll bring you next time, Mary, don't worry.
No, you mentioned in England how you felt that the general population had a much more interest in art. And what do you think, how in Ireland we can improve just the general public and their actual appreciation of real art?
Well, I think that's an uphill struggle, and it's been going on for years. I mean, myself and any of the print galleries that exist are, you know, constantly, let's say, trying to explain to people what the various media are. I think it's just a generational thing. I think England are just ahead of us in terms of wealth and development, and have been for generations, you know. So, but I think perhaps the next generation that I think younger people are more visually literate now. I do think, you know, online sales for artists is something that in the UK, in speaking to people there, happens quite a bit. Younger artists who a gallery won't take on because there's too many artists and too few galleries. A lot of them are just going online. To hell with this. I don't need a bleeding gallery. And however they operate, you know, online, whether it's Instagram, or they're far more capable of moving around through friends. And so that grows. I mean, even Banksy was part of I gave a talk actually in the Chinese thing on the English market, where I talked about Banksy. He started off in a collective of artists, and they're really just making street art posters for the hell of it and selling them to their friends. And slowly those things became more and more of interest, so much so that his printmaking has almost taken over the print world, which is astonishing. And what an achievement. And came totally from left of field, from disenfranchised artists, printmakers, through print, because print is such a medium that you don't need a lot of money to make it. It's not expensive to buy. So in every way, it's the social medium. And it's great to see someone like him, let's say, not coming from a prestigious art school, not coming from a prestigious gallery, in fact, coming from no gallery, and still it's there, you know.
Sure, there's a lot to think about there, Stephen.
Well, I'm going to breathe a massive sigh of relief and say thank you.
Fantastic talk, and really, really lovely talking to you. And thanks everyone for showing up again.